Hi, I'm James Zogby, and welcome to Viewpoint. Tonight I'll talk to Michael Isikoff. He's National Investigative Correspondent for NBC News about alleged Pakistan links to terror groups and how super PACs are influencing presidential politics here in the U.S. But first, I'll look at recent developments in the Middle East region. I want to welcome Marwan Muasher, Vice President for Studies at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He's been involved in Middle East peace efforts for 2 decades, served as Jordanian government in the government in a number of posts, including Deputy Prime Minister, Ambassador to Israel in the United States, and Foreign Minister. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
You just got back from Tunisia, where you co-chaired the National Democratic Institute's election observer team. How did it go?
Exceedingly well. I think there are a number of things that can be learned from Tunisia throughout the Arab world. First, the election committee, independent election committee that they established, did a fantastic job at keeping independent and unbiased, and everybody acknowledged that. 90%, over 90% of registered voters went to the polls. So obviously this was a
remarkable turnout.
Huge turnout, not just in the Middle East, probably in the whole world.
Yeah. I was in Palestine for the first election in '96 with the Carter Center, and the turnout there was extraordinary. But when I heard the stories of the lines and the people waiting, and then at polls closing and lines still there and letting people vote, it was an amazing turnout.
You know, the polls started at 7 in the morning. We were there at 6:30. By 7, there were 500. This is on a Sunday morning. 500 people already lined up. People lined up for more than 3-4 hours. But they did it under the sun, but they were cheerful. They felt really proud. Election officials, you can see the pride in their eyes. It was a good moment, I think, for democracy in general and for the Arab world as well.
The military issued a statement about the role that they played in creating the kind of the environment, the context for the election. Is there a concern in Tunisia, as I know there is among some in Egypt, about the role the military will play afterwards? Does that same role exist, or is the military in Tunisia going to step back, do you feel?
They have already, already stepping back. It's not the same role as in Egypt at all. I think that's another sort of marker, precedent that is good for the rest of the Arab world, that the military really, even though they were not allowed to vote themselves, they played a neutral role, and the Tunisians appreciated that. I think if you look at the election results, if you look at the turnout, if you look at the role of the election committee, if you look at the role of the military, it's good that the first elections after the Arab uprisings took place in Tunisia, because they can set a very positive precedent for the rest of the
Let's take a look
region.
at the results. We have them. They're not the final results, but this is what it looks like right now. Ennahda winning 41% of the vote, about 76 seats, a little over a third of what the new parliament will look like, and then liberal parties next. Going down, the folks from the last regime obviously doing very poorly, but Ennahda is going to have to make coalition with other parties, and seem inclined. I remember meeting some of them several decades ago, and they used the term at the time of being like the Italian Communist Party, i.e. maintaining their ideology but opting for pluralism. How comfortable are you with Ennahda as a pluralist party? Do you believe that? Because there's some debate in the country as to whether or not they are.
It's certainly a debate, and no one expected them to do so well, particularly, of course, the secular forces. I've met with a lot of Ennahda people. I find them to be extremely moderate. They certainly are more moderate than any other Islamic party in the Middle East. They ran some women who were unveiled on their list. They have clearly stated that they do not want to govern alone. They want to be part of a coalition, even at the time if they got a majority. They said that personal rights will not be affected, that the veil is a personal choice. They're not going to impose their values on society. They said all the right things. And, to the question of, do you guys really mean it? Their response was, well, we're going to have another election in a year's time. Because this election is to have a constituent assembly to write a new constitution. And if Tunisians don't believe us, if we don't, live up to what we said we will do, Tunisians have the ability to vote us out next time.
There's a letter I got, an email, just the day after the election from a young woman, a Tunisian woman who I know. I want to put part of it up on the screen and ask you to comment on several of the issues that she raises, because I thought it was a very thoughtful reflection. Here's this note. She said, "Voting was great, very emotional. I personally waited for almost 3 hours standing in line in order to vote for the first time in my life. But now I can't believe what I'm living. It's hard living in a democratic country, as you have to accept failure, which is very frustrating. I can't recognize the society I'm living in, but we have to accept it, hoping things will turn out fine. The rise of Nahda is the result of Ben Ali's oppression, but I still hope the presidential election will give a different result with a more modernist party." Let's start with the part of I thought the most interesting part was, a democracy, you have to learn to live with frustration. And those of us here in the United States who went through the 2000 election in particular know that feeling of, when you think it's going one way and it goes another way, even though you believe you really won. It's quite frustrating. Talk about that a little bit. What did you see in terms of the Tunisian reaction to the outcome from winners and losers?
Well, the winners certainly did not expect to get that, that much. The losers, the secular forces, are very scared, obviously. They don't want another Algerian experience. They don't want another Iranian experience. They're scared about their personal sort of lifestyles, etc. But in my own view, I think the concern is a bit exaggerated, frankly, Jim. I think that I sense a feeling in the Arab world, and certainly after I visited Tunisia, that people are not ready, are not willing to replace one autocracy with another. I think that this is something that is clear on everybody's mind. But I also think that political Islam is not something that you can keep on excluding from the political scene in the Arab world. These are people that have a constituency and have a right to be included in governments and have a right to show what they can deliver. It is easy to pontificate when you're on the outside, but this is a chance for them to come in and show what they are all about. So as long as, in my view, two major principles are enshrined in constitutions that are being written in the Arab world today: a commitment to pluralism at all times and peaceful means, which in Tunisian, of course, politics is not an issue. As long as these two principles are enshrined and are practiced, then I believe everybody has the right to be included in governing and to show what they can deliver.
I saw one press account of a group of young people holding a sit-in on the results, questioning the results, challenging the results, arguing that Nahda used money to buy votes, that they used religion to sway voters. Actually, I thought to some extent their complaints sounded like some complaints we have here in America about elections. But comment on that. When the results finally get announced, there'll be a period of time where the results can be challenged. Do you expect challenges in terms of the language that's used, free and fair? Was this free and fair on the whole, given the fact that there's never a perfect election? How good was it?
Well, no election is perfect, of course, but it is interesting for us that we met with all the major parties before the election. None of them had any problems with the neutrality and independence of the election commission. They all had, technical issues that they raised, but none had a problem with that. And none had a problem after the results of the elections. I mean, I saw the sit-in that you are talking about. They were in the tens, really. No sort of huge demonstrations came out in Tunis. There is a widespread feeling in the country that the election committee did a superb job, and they, in fact, were neutral. With over 90% again of registered voters going to the polls, it is really difficult to talk about tampering with the election results
itself. We're just hearing now that the results are now certified and that Nahda won 90 seats, which is a much larger group than they had even been projected to win. They'll still need about 20 or so more. and they will have to turn to some of these other parties. That will itself temper the kind of constitution writing that takes place, right?
Yes, and plus the fact that, let us remember, this is not sort of a long-term parliament. This is a parliament only entrusted with writing the constitution, which is supposed to take place during the next year. And in a year's time, there will be other, new elections to elect a long-term or a four-year parliament.
Let's shift next door to Libya. The end of Muammar Gaddafi was not a pretty sight at all. One of the things that troubled me was not only the way it happened, but the way that the Transitional National Council has reacted to it.
Yes.
With first one story and then another story and then a very dismissive story, which appears to be made up out of whole cloth, that he actually had his own people shoot him, etc. This doesn't create a lot of optimism about where this is going. Or let me say that, let me ask that, or does it not matter?
No, it does matter. I think that it is important that any new regime starts, applying democratic principles. Once again, if the idea is to replace one autocrat by another, we would not have done much in the Arab world. And I'm not encouraged by what I saw in Libya either. I don't think anybody was sorry to see Gaddafi go. He was a lunatic. He did a lot of harm to his country. But this is not the way you start, a new regime by. I mean, the rule of law must be supreme. And that means that, people cannot take the law into their own hands, and that means that you don't cover crimes that were committed once that happens. Libya is a different case than Tunisia. They don't have a history of political party organization. People are not educated. Gaddafi made sure that there were no institutions. The Transitional Council itself is not an elected council, but a group of people who came together, in opposition to Gaddafi. So it's still, I hope this is not, the start of things to come. I hope that this is an isolated incident. It's not an assuring one. Tunisia had a much better start than Libya. And let us remember, in the Arab world where, autocracies ruled for a long time, the notion that you can expect autocracies to be replaced by democracies overnight is simply wishful thinking. A lot of mistakes are going to happen depending on the circumstances in each Arab country. And in Libya, unfortunately, because of the lack of institutions, I think we will see a lot more mistakes, both on the political and economic front.
If you want to get in the conversation, give us a call. If you're calling from overseas, the number is 001-202-420-5665. If you're calling from here in the U.S., it's 1-202-420-5730. On that issue, the Tunisian revolt happened with Tunisians. The Egyptian situation happened with Egyptians. Libya didn't happen with Libyans. Even to the very end, it was a NATO attack on his convoy that made it possible for them to finally get him. I remember the Brazilian ambassador at the UN at the time that the resolution was being voted on saying that she was opposing it not because she supported the regime, but she said it changes the narrative of the Arab Spring. To what extent is this a problem, that the Libyans didn't make this on their own and may not be able to govern on their own in a way that creates a more open and democratic society, and that we simply get, the tribal, all of the things that were there before Gaddafi now will come up to the surface?
Well, it does change the narrative, Jim, on one hand. On the other hand, it is also easier to talk from the outside when people are being killed on the ground. I think in the end, this is an issue for the Libyan people to decide. I mean, I have not seen sort of the Libyan people unhappy about NATO interfering. We have not seen huge demonstrations, in fact, any demonstrations in the Arab world against NATO intervention. The Arab League itself took a decision for that intervention. So it depends on each circumstance. I'm not sure if this is, if you ask the Syrians, for example, whether they want NATO intervention, whether you would get the same result or not. Each country is different. But I would hate to pass judgment on it from the
I've got some
outside.
calls holding already, but I want to ask you about Syria before we start. The Arab League was in Syria yesterday, and beginning of a series of discussions they're going to have. They want an end to the violence and negotiations. To date, the government and the opposition seem to not want negotiations. Talk a little about where you see this going.
Well, in my own personal view, I think the Syrian regime is over. This is a regime that looks at this as a zero-sum game. Any reform process, even a half-serious one, is going to result in this regime leaving power. And they're not interested, of course, in putting their own neck on the line. Unfortunately, this is a bloody process. The regime is strong, and it's going to take a while before that takes place. I just think it is unacceptable for a regime to kill its own people at the rate of 20 a day. This is a regime that has lost its legitimacy. The Arab League is maybe too weak to take action against it, but I just don't think it is sustainable to have another 6 months or a year of people being killed like this at this rate.
The regime will counter that they brought hundreds of thousands of people out in Aleppo and Damascus in support of the regime. There is a division in Syria still on this issue.
There are certainly sectors in society that support the regime. The way to do this is through dialogue. But
Do you
when
think
a regime,
dialogue is possible?
I don't know at this stage.
Yeah.
If it might have been possible at the beginning, but once you use violence against your own people, then you can no longer claim that you
I
represent.
have more questions on this. I want to get to them in a minute, but let's go to Morocco for a first call. Caller?
Yes, good evening, James.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Good evening, Marwan.
Good evening.
We didn't see a single Tunisian general appears on TV or giving a press conference comparing to the Egyptian military, which is controlling everything, and they should go back to the bunkers forever. Nasser from the military, Saddam from the military, Mubarak from the military, it's over in the Arab world. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we have calls for Tantawi to actually run for president, which would just continue this process. Talk a little about that.
Well, I agree. I mean, in Tunis, the generals kept to their barracks and did not interfere. That is not the situation in Egypt. There are serious concerns in Egypt now that the military, is sending signs that it intends to keep controlling the process for much longer. This is not an encouraging sign, and any further postponement is not going to serve the cause of democracy in Egypt.
Call from Jordan. Caller? Hello,
Yes,
your question.
good
Yes.
My name is Wajih, and I want to talk to Mr. Marwan Muasher.
Yes.
Yeah, and my question is, good evening, Mr. Marwan.
Hello?
Hello, good evening.
Yes.
Hello, yes, we can hear you.
Yes, my question is, are you happy with what you are seeing in Jordan? Are we on the right path of development? We are a little bit frustrated seeing government being overcooked or cooked overnight and spending 6 to 9 months and then dismissed away and then getting another government. And this has been going on for years and years. At maximum, a government takes 1 year and then it's being dismissed and we get another government. Do you think this is the right path for Jordan, the next future?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm, as you, I think I'm frustrated with the pace of reform in the country, which I do not think is going well enough. I agree that these changes of governments are too frequent. Frankly, the real issue is not now the choice of prime ministers or even governments, but whether there is a political will that the system has to undergo a serious reform process that ends in power sharing, in a dilution of the executive powers, and in strengthening of parliament and the judiciary. Is this being done? I don't think it is being done at the needed pace. And I hope this new government is going to pick up this pace of reform. There is strong resistance to reform from a layer in Jordan, bureaucratic, political, and with the intelligence services that do not want the country to move on a serious reform process and lose their privileges. Jordan has almost a unique case in the Arab world in that people are not asking for the overthrow of the monarchy. They actually want the monarchy to stay. It does serve as a security blanket for all Jordanians, but they are asking for serious changes within the system, including how the executive rules. And are we doing enough? I don't think so yet.
I want to go back to Syria for a minute. There were calls by the National Council for protection, and I want your take on that. What that means, who would provide it, and where it might lead.
Again, the Syrians went along the Libyan route in establishing a transitional council. That is still, I understand, a point of debate within Syria. In other words, the opposition is not united in wanting a transitional council in this manner. I'm not, about to judge that case or not. What I will say is that, there is another debate of whether the Arab League should suspend Syria's membership in the Arab League or not. Some people want that to happen. Others are saying that if it does that, then you might cut off the only remaining maybe line of communications between the Arab League and between Syria. So it is not clear where we proceed from there. We are also dealing with a regime in Syria, as I said, that is frankly brutal, bloody, and is not willing to compromise for fear of losing its own power. It's not going to end up, unfortunately, in a nice way in Syria. But this is a situation where everybody's help, I think, is needed if we are to sort of shorten the suffering of the Syrian people.
We just did a poll. Released it on Tuesday, an Arab public opinion poll about Syria. The numbers were striking. I was actually, at first, didn't know what to make of the numbers because, when you get numbers that are so overwhelmingly skewed in one direction, you sort of tend not to believe them. But all the other numbers in the poll on all of the other questions displayed, incredible nuance in terms of Lebanese supporting Hezbollah to the numbers that I expected, or supporting Iran's role to the number I expected, but almost zero support for Bashar al-Assad in Lebanon, in Jordan, his two closest neighbors. When you say the regime is finished, clearly in the minds of public opinion, it is. Even in countries, like I said, that have a different politics, there's a sense that this has gone on too much, and it's just unacceptable.
And by the way, this is a recent development because the Syrian regime did enjoy support in many
in the poll we did
parts
2 years ago. He was viewed as one of the most popular Arab leaders.
This is a regime that has sold itself as the one that is closest to its people and the one that is standing against Israel. Yet what we're seeing today with the killings of more than 3,000 people is you cannot claim you're close to your people once you do that. And, it is being noticed by people everywhere around the Arab world.
Let's go to Turkey for a call. Caller? Hello?
Hello, yes.
Yes, your question?
After if they change the Arab regime in all the country or five. Hello?
Yes. Hello?
About the dialogue with Dr. Marwan Muasher.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble getting the question in. Just give me your question straight out. Don't stop. I'm sorry,
Excuse me.
Yes.
I want to ask Dr. Muasher if this, which happened in the Arab state, the revolution in Arab state, can help us to solve our problem with Israel.
I'm not getting the question. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to let you go. One further question about Jordan, and that is the issue of Khalid Mashal coming to Jordan. Certainly something he hasn't done in quite a while, and wondering if there's a change afoot in terms of both the Jordanian reception here, even some discussion about the Hamas office reopening in Amman. What does this mean?
Well, these are still sort of rumors that I've seen and news reports. It has not materialized yet, so I don't frankly know whether Khalid Mish'al and Hamas will end up coming back to Jordan or not. I think that it is important to differentiate between the need for reform and between maybe appeasing certain groups. Certainly, I'm one that believes that we need to deal with with the Palestinian Authority, and that any political party like Hamas has a legitimate right to be part of the government in the occupied territories, but also needs to give up arms, I think, if they want to be part of that government.
Let's go to Michigan for a call. Caller?
Yes, good afternoon, gentlemen. The question is, I'm wondering what is the main problem in the Middle East? Is it Syria or Lebanon or really Israel?
Elaborate just a bit. What do you mean by that question?
Well, I'm seeing like the whole world is standing against Syria, and Syrian forces, uniformed people being killed every day. And one Israeli soldier had...
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm going to stop you there. I think Marwan is getting the question.
I think one does not negate the other. In other words, Israel is one of the major problems in the region. The occupation is a major problem in the region, and it's an occupation that should not stand. And nobody should condone the killings of Palestinians by Israelis in any way, shape, or form. That does not mean that we blind our eyes to what is happening in the rest of the Arab world in terms of governance. This is not against Syria. It is against the low level of governance that has existed in the Arab world for decades. And that we have seen people that are unwilling anymore to accept such a low level of governance. This has not happened just in Syria. It has happened in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Yemen, in Libya, in Syria, throughout the Arab world. And I believe that this has been one of the major shortcomings of the Arab world, that we have focused all our energy on the Arab-Israeli conflict and almost ignored the governance issue in the Arab world, to the point where we neither liberated Palestine nor were successful in building a system of checks and balances and a pluralistic society in the Arab world. This is the real challenge today, whether these uprisings are going to result in pluralistic societies or in the replacement of one autocrat by another, and I certainly hope it will be the first.
One more question going back to the beginning, and that is Tunisia. I said in the beginning that Tunisia was like Connecticut. It's where Broadway plays start, and if they work, they then go to Broadway. Egypt is Broadway. It's the big time. Their election is coming up. Obviously, there are some lessons that you point out, but what are your expectations about Egypt? Is this going to be a Broadway hit or not? Do you expect this election to actually be as successful as the Tunisian
No,
one?
I don't. I don't expect the election to be as successful. Egypt has a lot more problems than Tunisia does. Mistakes are going to be made. The role of the military is one of the problems that Egypt has that Tunisia does not have. As I said at the beginning, I don't expect democracies to just flourish overnight in the Arab world, but I am optimistic that in the long run, we will have pluralistic societies. Mistakes will be made in Egypt as elsewhere in the Arab world. Tunisia has set a number of good examples: an independent election committee, a moderate Islamic party committed to pluralism, a high turnout vote, a political party-based system. All of these things have gone very smoothly so far.
And
in
Egypt
Tunisia.
has how many of those?
Well, they don't have an independent military. We don't know yet about the independent coalitions. The commitment of the Islamist parties, and is not one Islamist party in Egypt. I mean, the Muslim Brotherhoods also have the Salafis and others. Their commitment to pluralism does not go, half as far as where Tunisia is. But if everything goes well in Tunisia, that is going to set a marker for Egypt and the rest of the Arab world, and vice versa.
Let me take a last call from UK caller. Hello? Yes, your question.
Hello. Mr. Zogby, thank you for the program and thank you for your guest. I'm from Libya originally, studying in the UK. Just a comment about your statement about the NATO in Libya. Yes,
Sure.
NATO helped Libyans a lot, but if you could remember when the forces stuck in Brega for 2 months and NATO bombarding every day without any progress, actually without people on the ground in Libya, believing in their cause, NATO cannot do it from the air alone.
Okay. Thank you. A comment?
Again, I think the Libyans were aided by NATO, but there was also a clear will to stand up finally to the Gaddafi regime in a way that we have not seen before.
Thank you very much, Marwan, and thanks for the calls. When we come back, I'm going to talk to Michael Isikoff, National Investigative Correspondent with NBC News, and we'll get some more of your calls in, so stay with us.